never find it. In fact, some have been looking for it since the beginning of service. Habakkuk is a prophet who's confused. He's got some questions. The second verse of the first chapter, he says, "How long, O Lord? Will I call for help and you not hear me?" Anybody ever felt like that? God, you taking too long. Now, you know if the preacher feels, he's a prophet, if the preacher feels God is taking too long, what the congregation must think. He probably didn't say this on a Sunday morning when everybody could hear, because his job is to tell folk it's going to be all right. But in his own solemn assembly, he said, "How long?" So one problem that he's facing is God is taking too long to come through. Anybody ever feel? God, I believe you stuff, but you slow. Even the prophets struggled with the slowness of God. God was not only moving too slow, but his movements were very confusing. He couldn't make sense of it. In fact, God, responding to his statement, says in chapter 1, verse 5, "Look among the nations, observe, and be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You would not believe it if it were told to you." So you're taking too long, and I can't figure you out. Now, that's a double problem. One problem is God appearing to move too slow, and another problem is an inability to understand what he is doing because it seems so contradictory. In this particular prophecy, he was going to raise up an evil people called the Babylonians to discipline his people, which causes Habakkuk to say in verse 13, "Your eyes are too pure to approve of evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. So why do you look in favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they are?" In other words, it's not fair. I know I'm bad, but they worse. You're pure, but you using them more than you using me. It's not fair. So you're taking too long. I can't figure out what you're doing, and a little bit I do know is not fair. So you're not the only one who thinks these thoughts about God. Now, it's hard to say it because you sound so unspiritual. You know, it's a lot easier to say, he's going to fix it. He's able. He's a wheel in the middle of a wheel. He's a rose of Sharon. He's a bright morning star. He's balm in Gilead. It's a lot easier to say that. But when you by yourself and you're thinking your real thoughts, while you believe in him, while you know God is real, there are those times where you have to raise some real questions. Why are you moving so slow, taking so long? Why are you so confusing? I don't understand you. Because what you're doing contradicts what I know about you. Well, the good news is you're not alone. The prophets, he's not the only one, had to struggle with the methodology of God. In fact, he says in the second verse of chapter 3, the last chapter of this book, "Lord, I have heard the report about thee, and I fear." So now let's watch this thing. You're taking too long. I'm confused, it's not fair, and I'm afraid. A combination of negatives, and he's the preacher. There are only 3 chapters in this book, but it begins off in a pit, but it ends on a peak. It begins down in the despair. Physically, he's a wreck. He's a nervous wreck. Look at the language used in chapter 3, verse 16. I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Decay entered my bones, and in my place, I trembled. That's a nervous wreck. Physically, I am just done, distraught. I'm falling apart and unraveling at the sea. Anybody ever felt like they were unraveling? That life was unraveling, just going every which way. Chaos here. Chaos when you get up. Chaos at home. Chaos at work. Just unraveling. That's the situation. Maybe your situation as you look toward the new year, glad it came, but scared to death about where it's going. Glad the past is behind you, but really uncertain about the future in front of you. That was his problem. And he's got to wait quietly, he says at the end of verse 16, for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. In other words, what he was looking forward to wasn't too exciting to look forward to. His future looked kind of dim. Distress, he called it. I can't take another year like this last one. And yet I don't see much hope for improvement. I wonder if there's anybody here like that today. You just don't see anything. But in the last 3 verses, after he's taken 3.5 chapters to tell you his struggle, his frustration, his confusion, his fear, it comes down to 3 verses. Let me read them one more time. Though the fig tree should not blossom, though there be no fruit on the vine, though the yield of the olive should fail, though the field produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the field, and there be no cattle in the stall, yet I will exalt in the Lord, I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He has made my feet like hinds' feet, and he makes me to walk on my high places. There are three options that are generally given by the world, or that people take as they look at negative situations in their life. One way is to resign yourself. That's the way it is. It was that way, it is that way, gonna be that way. So you just resign to the fact that you just destined to be miserable. You destined to be a loser. You destined to not have a change come. That's life. So you kind of just resign yourself to it. You kind of just say that that's the way it is. That's the way it's going to be. And so people who resign always let you know that they're in that resigning mode because they sigh a lot. How you doing? What's going on? They just resign. That's the way it is. There is a second way that people deal with life when it doesn't seem to offer a future, and that is detachment. In other words, they distract themselves so they don't have to think about it. If I can come home and turn on the television, I can be distracted by the shows. If I can perhaps take drugs, I can feel good enough to be distracted from the pain. If I can go out and to just have a good time and party hardy, then I can let that erase. The only problem with detachment is that it's camouflage. In other words, it doesn't fix anything. It just hides it and only hides it for a little while. So you have to be perpetually entertained to perpetually not think about it. But it's always underneath. You always know it's there. There's a third way that people seek to deal with their uncertainty or struggle, and that is, we'll call it bravado. Bravado. Take it like a man. Take it like, hold your chin up. You the man, be the man. I can handle it. I'm a real man or woman. And I'm going to handle it. I'm going to face it. I can take it. My mama raised me to handle anything. The only problem with bravado is when things get bad enough, all the pep talk in the world won't help you. Pep talk is good, but pep talk doesn't last. It's like having a pep talk before a football game. At halftime, the score 52-0, you're losing. The coach come in halftime talking about pep talk. After a while, reality sets in. Okay? We ain't gonna win. And after a while, all the pep talk in the world is not gonna do it. You've experienced that. You come to church, heard a sermon preached, and got pepped up. You came to church like this, you heard the sermon go, yeah, I'm gonna make it. Yeah, you fired up. Yeah. 5 minutes after the benediction. Shucks, this stuff ain't well. Because irreligious pep talk is not enough. So the question we face today is, what do you do when God is taking too long? What do you do when uncertainty is in front of you? What do you do when you are afraid? What do you do when you feel like you're falling apart at the seams? Resignation. That won't do it. Detachment. That's camouflage. That hasn't addressed anything. Bravado only goes so long. Habakkuk says in verse 18, I will exalt in the Lord. He says, even though I have my questions, even though I have my confusion, even though I don't see solution number one in sight, and even though God does not make sense, rather than pretend that nothing is wrong, I am going to exalt in the Lord. That is, I am going to trust in the reliability of God even when I can't see him or what he is doing. I am going to choose to believe in the reliability of God even in the dark. Learning to trust God in the dark when you have no support for your faith other than who you know him to be. That is the only content you have. Who you know him to be. You appeal to two things. His character, what he is like, and his works, what he has already done for others, whether you or someone else in the past. People always say, I'm going to have faith, I'm going to have faith. That's never the question. The question is, in what? What is the object of faith? To believe is a meaningless term until you tell me what you are believing. You could say, I believe in Santa Claus. You could say, I believe in the tooth fairy. So your belief system is flawed. Belief only matters if the object has substance. We respond to our circumstances because our circumstances affect us. But he has to make a choice. It is the choice that every believer here today has to make, and that is the choice as to whether you will choose to believe God. That is the question. Will I choose to believe God? I have to believe two things about God. I have to believe, number one, his character. What he told me he is like. And I have to believe it in the dark. I can't see it. I don't feel it. But since he can't lie, it must be true. And you must choose to believe that. Look, you got to believe that when there's no emotional kicking, there's no choir singing, there is no preacher preaching, and you out there by yourself, you got to decide that I'm going to believe what I know to be true about God. And that's one of the things, that's why theology is important, so that you know what to believe when hard times come. You've got to know that you can count on his character, that he is true, that he does have power, that he does have presence even when I do not feel him near, that he is there because he said so. And you got to choose to do that. But then you got to believe something else. You got to believe his works. That's another reason why you need to know the Bible, because you've got to know what he did yesterday. You see, you got to know what he did yesterday. Habakkuk spends verses 3 through verse 15 rehearsing what God did yesterday of chapter 3. He alludes to the Red Sea. He alludes to David killing Goliath. He alludes to all of these historical things. Why do you need to know what God did yesterday? Why is it important for you to know what he did in the past, in the Bible, in the life of your mama, in your friend's life? Why do you need testimonies of what he did yesterday? Why do you need to remember it? Because of this. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The reason why you've got to know what he did is because what he did, he can still do. Because he does not change. We call it the immutability of God. He does not change. His methods vary, but his abilities don't. And therefore, when you remember what he did, then you know what he can do. And let me talk about that. Because when you look back at the way God did things, he never had one way. There wasn't a cookie cutter method of addressing people's needs or problems or circumstances. And when you look closely, sometimes he let people get to the last minute before he came through. Sometimes it wasn't all in advance. If you needed something December 31st, sometimes he waited till December 31st. He didn't show up in advance. He came just in the nick of time. You have to choose to trust God in the dark. When you can't see him, you don't feel him. There are no things that are whipping you up. You can't find anything to hang on to but what you know to be true about him. Habakkuk is a prophet who's confused. The second verse of the first chapter, he says, how long, O Lord, will I call for help and you not hear me? Anybody ever felt like that? One problem is God appearing to move too slow, and another problem is an inability to understand what he is doing because it seems so contradictory. In this particular prophecy, he was going to raise up an evil people called the Babylonians to discipline his people, which causes Habakkuk to say in verse 13, your eyes are too pure to approve of evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. So why do you look in favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they are? In other words, it's not fair. I know I'm bad, but they worse. You're pure, but you using them more than you using me. It's not fair. So you're taking too long. I can't figure out what you're doing, and the little bit I do know is not fair. So you're not the only one who thinks these thoughts about God. There are only 3 chapters in this book, but it begins off in a pit, but it ends on a peak. It begins down in the despair. Physically, he's a wreck. He's a nervous wreck. Look at the language used in chapter 3, verse 16. I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Decay entered my bones, and in my place, I trembled. Physically, I am just done, distraught. I'm falling apart and unraveling at this. Anybody ever felt like they were unraveling? That life was unraveling, just going every which way. Chaos here. Chaos when you get up. Chaos at home. Chaos at work. Just unraveling. That's the situation. But he has to make a choice. It is the choice that every believer here today has to make, and that is the choice as to whether you will choose to believe God. That he is true, that he does have power, that he does have presence even when I do not feel him near, that he is there because he said so. And you got to choose to do that. Look at chapter 2, verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. That means shut up. Be silent, that means be quiet. All right? The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be quiet. Now, to understand it, you got the verses before it talks about dumb idols that people look to for solutions. They can't speak. They can't talk. You have to set them up, break them down, and they are dumb. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth, that's you and me, we on the earth, let all the earth be silent before him. Now, why do you need to know that? When you can't figure it out, don't get a headache over it. When you can't solve it, don't stay up all night trying to figure it out. God knows how to tell you what he wants you to know. And if he's not informed you of anything more than he has informed you of, you go to sleep. And stop fussing, cussing, and complaining, and be silent before the Lord. In other words, let him do what he's going to do. Leave God alone. He is not a dumb idol. He is not a lifeless being. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let the earth be silent. What do you do in a temple? You worship. Look, in your confusion, you worship. In your lack of clarity, you worship. In your emptiness, you worship. In your despair, you worship. You simply say, Lord, all I can do is adore you in your temple because I have no explanation for anything that's going on right now. None. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. And so he calls for an act of faith. Matthew 6 says, be anxious for nothing. Because just as you can trust God for yesterday, in fact, you didn't even think you were going to make it till now, the way things look. You just say, if I got to go through another year like this, I'm not going to make it. Guess what? You made it. You here. Your problem may not be solved, but you here. I will exalt in the God of my salvation. Remember when you first started flying and it was turbulence? And how nervous that makes you? You know, plane go boom, 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 jumping up and down. And you get a little uncomfortable with turbulence, you know? You know, especially if it's real bad in a storm and you don't know what's going on. See, the problem with a plane is you're not in control. That's the problem. I can handle a bumpy road. I'm behind the wheel. You bump all day. As long as my foot is on the accelerator and my foot is on the brake, we can make it. But I can't see what's going on out there. I don't know what them boys doing up front. You remember how you long for the pilot to say something? Tell the truth, shame the devil. I know. You wanted the pilot. You ain't care who you were sitting next to. Them talking about, oh, bumpy flight. You don't know what you're talking about. I want the pilot. And when the pilot said, we are entering into rough air, you could, even though it was rough air, you could take a deep breath. Because he didn't come on and say, we crashing. He said, it's rough air. You heard the voice from up front, a voice you could not see. Entering into God's holy temple in your worship, when things are falling apart so that he can speak to your heart, won't change necessarily the bumpy air until it's time for smooth flying, but at least you know somebody up front has got it under control. Right? And so he says, I will exalt in the Lord. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent, but before him. You're before him. You can't figure it out? Don't. God knows how to tell you what he wants you to know. Don't be getting a headache over stuff you can't change, stuff you can't fix. You go to the holy temple. He says, I will exalt in the Lord. I choose to do that. I like the way Psalm 34 says, Psalm 34, verses 4 to 7. He says, my fears look to him. My apprehension looked to him. I didn't just talk to everybody else about my distress. I pointed them to him. Right? My fears looked to him. And then it's preceded by the statement, fig tree should not blossom, no fruit on the vine, olive should fail, fields produce no food, flock should be cut off. But the key word is the word though. Somebody say though. Though. Let me give you a more contemporary word for though. Suppose. Even though this happens, suppose. How many folks spend a lot of time with suppose? Suppose this is cancer. Suppose we don't have the rent money. Suppose this job doesn't come through. What are we going to do? That's suppose. We look at all the options. Oh, I love Habakkuk. Habakkuk says suppose. Even though. But instead of dismissing suppose, he invites suppose into his house. He says, suppose, come on in, let's talk. And he creates the worst possible situation. Because the situation that he extracts from is a hopelessness. He says, let me come up with, here it is, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. And let me put it in contemporary English. Suppose there is no money in the bank. Suppose both cars break down and I have to walk or catch a bus. Suppose I get a pink slip during this downturn in the economy. Suppose my health report doesn't come back like I hoped it would. Suppose I spend another year alone as a single person. Suppose we're still battling in our marriage relationship a year from now. Suppose, worst case scenario. He says, even if my worst case scenario happens, I will exalt in the Lord. I make a choice that I am going to focus on who God is and what God has done. If you make it a conscious decision that I am going to rejoice in the Lord, what will you get out of it? What will come your way? What can you expect to benefit out of if you say you are going to rejoice in the Lord? If you say, I don't have a job, but I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. Things are going bad at home, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I'm still single another year, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I lost my job, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. I choose to rejoice in the Lord. What is going to happen? Two things. You will now be controlled by joy and not happiness. Everybody want to be happy. There's nothing wrong with being happy. Don't get me wrong. I like happy. Happy is better than sad. Any day. It's just that life is full of both. What is the difference between joy and happiness? Happiness is feeling good because my circumstances are good. There's money in the bank, my cars are working, my health is good, I got the promotion, so I'm happy. The problem with happy is when stuff goes south, you go south with it. So that's why happiness is a roller coaster. It's up and down. But he says, I will find joy in the God of my salvation. Now, what's joy? Joy is inner stability and tranquility, regardless of external circumstances. In other words, joy is not dependent upon what's happening out there, only what's happening.